Dr. RN Di Carlo from the Italian National Health Institute. And as you can see from the title, we talk about the preparation of healthcare facilities for severe events. I want to thank Dr. Di Carlo for his presence here and also the Institute for the support in our activity. And now I leave you the floor. Thank you so much. Colomba vuoi cominciare a registrare, ragazzi.
Thank you. So I have the very bad role to start the lesson just after right after the lunch. So I think that I have to find a way to collect your attention. I have to spend some effort to try to catch your attention. So, as Andrea has said, I'm Cristian Di Carlo. I'm a researcher at the Italian National Institute of Health, and I'm here because I have been involved in the last 5 years in the drafting of the civil defense plan relative to the health sector, which is a plan that is specifically addressing some circumstances, some scenarios that have never been considered before. And probably I will give you some hints, I will give you some details about something that you have never heard before. And so I have to start from the very beginning. During the lessons of this morning, you have had the opportunity to learn something about the fundamental physics underlying all the things that we have to discuss about the nuclear and radiological emergencies. Now we will try to make a little step forward just to enter the specific matter that we are addressing during this master. So as you can see from the title, I will try to describe the preparation strategies that we have just developed in Italy to be prepared in case of nuclear and radiological emergency, but specifically from a medical organization point of view. So we will address the matter of nuclear and radiological emergency by specifically considering only the response that we have to organize at a hospital level, at a pre-hospital level. So we will try to be very pragmatic and practical during this lesson. So just to try to understand the subject of the lesson, let's start with a very brief context slide. We will start with a very important distinction that I think that we consider the basis of the master that you are attending. That is the difference between crisis and emergency. So we will at first try to understand how to use these words in another way. If you have a question, please collect your question. I will try to make a very short break of 5-10 minutes up to the first hour. So we will collect the question and I will describe the question during this break. So after this distinction between crisis and emergency, we will speak about national plans and documents that have been drafted and published in Italy. So we have the National Civil Defense Plan, which is dated up to 2021. We will have the National Civil Defense Plan applied to the health sector, which was published very few months ago at the end of 2024. We will speak about the different objectives of these two plans and how to use that. Obviously, which is the target audience of the plans and the innovations, the main innovation of these plans. Then we will speak more in detail about the measures that we have to put in place in case of a nuclear radiological emergency in Italy. But most of the things that we will see are applicable in principle also to the other different technologies of emergencies, also to biological and chemical emergencies. So we will see the preventive measures. In particular, we will spend some more words on the tertiary preventive measures. Then we will speak about surveillance and all the protection or rescue measures that can be put in practice in case of events, in case of nuclear and radiological events. And when we will speak about the rescue measurements, we will specifically see what we have prepared for the preparation at a pre-hospital level and for the preparation at a hospital inside the hospital. So let's start from the very beginning. In the practical usage of everyday, emergency and crisis are always identified as triangles. Generally, they are used with very, very close meaning one to each other. The word emergency has a Latin origin. We can understand easily from the fact that it contains the word emerge. So an emergency is simply something that emerges or arises from the average root of the event. So you have an emergency when something not expected happens. For example, the skyscraper can be considered an emergency of the normal shape of the skyline of a surface. Now, when you hear the word emergency, you immediately think about something related with accidents, with incidents, but the meaning is much more natural than what we think. So, this emerging from the routine situation can happen due to the number of the resources employed, the demand on personal abilities, and the level of danger. When at least one of these three things emerge from the natural root of things, we can speak about an emergency. The crisis is, in a certain sense, a kind of emergency, so you can consider an emergency as well, but this situation does not emerge from the normal root of the events, but it emerges from what we are capable of thinking, what we are capable of imagining. So it's a kind of emergency of imagination. So it's something that is outside not only the root of the events, the normal root of the event, but also outside the normal root of our thinking. So in principle, crisis is something that we cannot even imagine. And so if we cannot even imagine what is a crisis, we cannot be prepared to face a crisis. So let's go a little bit forward. So emergencies are known. If we are good in understanding the emergency situation, we can say the emergencies are well known, and there are established intervention methods. After years of experience in managing emergency, we can say that the emergencies are well known, and if we work hard on organizing the response to emergency, we can say that we know the methods that we can use to act when an emergency occurs. Crises, by definition, are not known in advance. So the bodies responsible for managing an emergency needs to be prepared to deal with the emergency. In principle, they should be prepared to handle an emergency. In case of crisis, because of the fact that crisis cannot be foreseen, cannot be imagined, the bodies responsible for the response in case of a crisis cannot be prepared to the specific scenario. But we will see together that something obviously can be done. The emergency do not result in a reduced effectiveness of the response or in the availability of information needed to understand the event. Because of the fact that we know the emergency in advance, we have to be capable of facing an emergency without determining a reduction in the effectiveness of the response. So the effectiveness of the response has to be assured in an emergency. We have to assure a certain level of response when we are playing a certain role inside an emergency response. In case of crisis, obviously, when we have a crisis, we have, of course, a reduction of the effectiveness. So we have to deal with a situation in which the non-preparation of the persons, of the people and bodies involved is responsible probably of a reduction of the effectiveness. There are emergencies of varying severity. This varying severity depends on the number and the amount of resources, the personal abilities required by the person that are in charge of preparing or managing the response, or depending on the danger the emergency is capable of introducing in our scenario. Also, the crises are characterized by different levels of severity. When we are in emergency, if we are good in managing the emergency, we can restore, we are all aiming to restore the initial situation. So when we are in emergency, we have basically three possibilities. If we are good in managing the response to the emergency, we should be capable to restore the initial situation. If we are quite good, we should be capable of maintaining the emergency situation. If we are not well prepared, if we are not well prepared, the emergency could rise into a crisis. So when the level of the emergency exceeds a certain level, a certain threshold, we can say the emergency has changed into a crisis. The crisis can be split, and this is generally done in this situation. I'm trying to categorize and explain things into crises that arise from the generation of an emergency, crises that cannot be prevented, and crises that are sudden, that occur in a sudden way. So let's go a moment from this. Just another thing that I want to add because I get time. We are extremely good in understanding this, especially if we have examples. In English, what in Italian say we call the pronto soccorso, is called the emergency department, the emergency rooms. Because what happens inside the emergency department of the hospital is exactly the management of emergency. It's an emergency because the situation is obviously risky. It requires a certain amount of resources. It requires a certain capability of the medical professionals involved. But of course, they are trained to manage the situation. The situation can be imagined before. So the emergency department are trained, or the staff of the emergency department is trained to handle the emergency. They continuously work in emergency, but they cannot. They have to assure that we don't pass from an emergency to a crisis. Another example of emergency is the intervention of the law enforcement in case of a robbery. Obviously, it's a risky situation. Obviously, it's a scenario that can provide harm to someone or to something, but the members of the staff of the law enforcement are trained to face that kind of situation. They are trained to face that kind of scenario. So that scenario is an emergency as well. Let's go to the trends that we have in Italy. In Italy, and with some differences also in Europe. We have the national plan for the management of radiological and nuclear emergencies. In the title, we have the clear identification of the fact that this plan is aiming to face emergencies, not the crisis. This plan was published in 2022. But I have the date in the next slide, and this was drafted according to the requirements contained in the Articles 182 of the most important text, legislative text in Italy pertaining to radiation, the so-called legislative decree 101 from 2020. Then, and this plan is free for consultation. So you can go sitting on the net and find this plan. Then we have the national plan for events involving the chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear agents. This plan is not available for consultation. It is drafted and published by the Ministry of the Interior, and it is not mentioned in the legislative decree because this plan is not of interest for the public. So this plan is considered only by the person that works inside the authorities, inside the bodies responsible for any specific task in the framework of the response. Then we have a document, another document. It is not a plan. Here we have a plan published and free. Here we have a plan that is published but is segregated, so it cannot be consulted by the public. Here we have the manual, a kind of guidelines, something in between from legislative act and guidelines. The manual in Italy said, and it's the manual for nuclear radiological emergencies written by the CIVA in Italy, it's called, and is the commission responsible for the evaluation of doses. So let's see these two plans more in detail. In green, so the second group is representative of the National Plan for the Management of Radiological Emergencies. The color on the right, in purple, we have the National Plan for events involving chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear reactions. For simplicity, we will use the same words that are used in institutional scenarios. And so we will call this second plan as the Civil Defense Plan. Then we will see what it means. So the first plan was, the last update was published in 2022. The second one, the last update, was published in 2021. Obviously, you can see that the last help to the drafting of these documents has been given by the COVID management, on COVID pandemic management. So, which are the reference scenarios considered by these two documents? Please remember that the first one is specifically addressing the emergencies, and the second one we don't know for the title. So we still don't know which is the subject of the second document that we have on right. Emergency, which are the most typical emergency in case of in the field of nuclear radiological fact. Of course, the accident and nuclear power plants. We don't have nuclear power plants for the production of electric power in Italy. Power. So the plan is only addressing the accident occurring at the nuclear power plants beyond the border. In particular, the three much closer nuclear power plants are considered within the scenarios discussed by this plan. An emergency, clearly an emergency. We have to be in the condition, we have to have the knowledge to understand in advance what is going to happen when a certain accident is occurring at a certain power plant. On the other hand, on the right, you have this scenario described: the release of radioactive material into the environment, the attack with nuclear weapons, the attack on nuclear facilities or storage sites, the attack on nuclear powered submarine, the attack with a dirty bomb, the attack on the transport of radioactive materials, and the interception of ballistic missile. So, as we can see, these are events that we can categorize. We can spend hours trying to arrange the different events in these 8 categories. But of course, the consequences of these events depend on several variables. So it is not easy at all to understand which would be the response of a specific part of our territory in case of one of these events. So maybe we are thinking about crisis in this plan. These two plans obviously also specify the competent authorities for alarming, and in case of emergency, the competent authorities are the Civil Protection Department, the National Inspectorate for Nuclear Safety and Radiation Protection, and the Department of Firefighters. So, in principle, if we exclude the Inspectorate for nuclear safety and radiation protection, the authorities responsible for managing and alarming in case of these events are exactly the same that we have for any other kind of emergency occurring on the national territory. The only difference is the National Inspectorate, which in principle should have the specific knowledge about nuclear emergency. On the other hand, we have the authorities which are responsible of the alarming in case of a crisis, which are there is a correlation between the letter in the bottom list and the letter in the above list. So we can say that the intelligence agency, for example, are responsible for the alarming in case of release of radioactive materials. And this is obviously a clear identification of the fact that we are speaking about crisis. The radioactive material and the likely intentional dispersion of radioactive materials into the environment, the idea to compromise the health of public, is probably recognized not by measurements performed in the environment. Because yes, we have a lot of network, but it's not easy at all to release radioactive material in a way that the automatic recognition by the network that we have in Italy is not able to happen. It's not capable to happen. So probably this kind of attack are recognized firstly by the intelligence agency of our nation. In case of attack, nuclear weapons, clearly the alarm is really easy to be given, and is given by the armed forces, the law enforcement, the national health service. And the armed forces, law enforcement, and national health services are more or less involved in the alarming of each of these events. The only exception is represented by the attack on nuclear power, the attack on nuclear facilities, and by the attack on transport of radioactive material. Only in these cases, the alarm can be originated by the operator, by the carrier, so by the person or the people that are working in the facility or that are driving physically the mean that you are using to transport radioactive materials. The coordination for the emergency is up to the Civil Protection Department and the Nuclear Emergency Center. The Nuclear Emergency Center is established inside the Inspectorate for the Regional Protection and is activated only during a certain event. The coordination in case of crisis is obviously centralized by the Ministry of the Interior and locally by the emanation, the local emanation of the Ministry of the Interior, which are the factions. Which are the objectives? The objectives of the first plan, the National Plan for the Emergencies, is to define and implement preventive measures to safeguard the public health and also the production. We very commonly neglect the production, but obviously one of the main objectives of a plan should be to protect either the public or the production. Another objective is to ensure the public information and to guarantee the assistance to all the Italian citizens that are living abroad at the moment of the event. In case of the crisis, we can prevent the crisis and we can manage the crisis. We have preventive measures, control measures, and damage mitigation or rescue or protection. And we will see this kind of measure with this kind of provisions even in our plans in this presentation. So let's start from the beginning. We have the national plan that is called the National Civil Defense Plan, published in 2001. For the first time in 2003, it was published. The direct emanation of this civil defense plan applies specifically to the health sector. So it's the National Civil Defense Plan, Health Sector. This is the way how this plan is referred to. The ability of these plans are dating back to 2021 for the National Civil Defense Plan, and to 2024. I was anticipating this thing some years ago. The last month of 2024, during the last month of 2024, we managed to finish the work on civil defense plan, specifically applied to the health sector, so containing all the conditions given the healthcare facilities. But we have in 2003, we have a civil defense plan for the health sector. Now we have a civil defense guidelines for the health sector. And the difference, not so easy, we understand we spend a lot of time to try to clarify our ideas also inside the working table that was endured in the drafting of this document. The plan in Italy has the possibility to define the competencies, to define which body, which authority is in charge of something. The guidelines is not capable of things. So now that I have explained this, so you can maybe think of these guidelines as a kind of failure. So we cannot even manage to assign the competencies in terms of the response in case of new biological events. The reality is really different because in the previous plan, no competencies were assigned at all because there were a lot of problems in the Italian federal in splitting the competencies for some of the things that need to be done when trying to respond to nuclear biological events. So basically, the documents are the same, but the work carried out during the last 5 years has led to a very significant document if compared to the previous one. That was very difficult to be understood. Also by the person working in these things. So let's try to imagine what would have happened in case of a real emergency, shipping crisis before 2020. Now we have a real guidelines that can be guidelines document that can be probably and effectively used in case of emergencies. Which are the target audience of these documents? Obviously, the profession, which are the local emanation of the Ministry of the Interior, the regional and local health authorities. Obviously, we are talking about health sector, so for sure we have to consider the regional and local health authorities, but also the healthcare professionals. And for the first time in these guidelines, a lot of very useful tools are given directly to the healthcare professionals. And it's due to the fact that this plan was not available for consultation. These guidelines, not the fact that it is structured as a guidelines document, is available for you. So you can consult this document on your own document. And it's also very useful because I can offer this lesson. So to the drafting of the civil defense guidelines relative to the health sector, we work in this subgroup. The drafting of the National Civil Defense Plan was articulated on the result of the work of different subgroups. For nuclear and radiological events, the subgroup was composed, as you can see in the bottom of the slide. So there were two responsible for the Italian National Institute of Health, one responsible for the ENEA, one responsible coming from the Capo di Pavia, that means a center specifically devoted to deal with emergency that involve the poisoning of people. And obviously the coordination of the work has been carried out, has been done by members of the Ministry of Health. So which is the structure of this document? The document can be considered as a union of two distinct parts. The first one is educational, informative, didactical, we can say it in a lot of different ways, but it contains some essential, fundamental information about the criteria, basic criteria to identify harmful events that result from a terroristic attack, which are the target sites, which is the main target site, which are the pathway of exposure in case of an event, the likely agents that can be used in such scenarios, which are the radioactive agents, and the mechanisms that are capable of producing an alarm from the health point of view to the people being exposed to the sequences of the event. So we will skip totally this part because you will have the opportunity to see all these things in very specific lessons during this part. Some of the things that are described during this part have been already discussed with you by colleagues of mine. So we can pass to the other part, the second part, which is the much more meaningful one. This part is managerial, operational. So information are given to organize, to help, to allow the organization. And this information are based, other information based on which the local intervention procedure should be developed on the national territory. So in this part, we will see how the teams of emergency management and victim treatment are dealt with, by considering both the scenario of being on field, directly on the side of the event, and being in the hospital, inside the hospital, in the emergency room of the hospital, which are the main innovations. Guidelines are explicitly given to allow a specific, a scenario-specific, a site-specific organization of the response in pre-hospital settings and in hospital setting. And we will see at the end of this presentation how this kind of information are given. Then, and this is probably the main innovation that we had, we strongly decide to introduce some practical tools. And the most important practical tools was the development of original radionuclide specific sheets. This habit of using risk sheets that are specific for each agent that can be used in case of an emergency is typical for biological events and chemical events. But it's not easy at all in case of nuclear and biological events. Only America, the United States of America, has similar organization. So if we go to the national document produced by the United States of America, we will see that some kind of radionuclide specific sheet are provided, radionuclide by radionuclide. But we didn't want to simply reproduce, copy and paste the work done in the United States, so we decided to develop something that, in our opinion, was more applicable and more useful in the Italian territory. So let's go to the specific risk sheets. We identified 34 radionuclides that, based on evaluations, literature review, and international and national consideration, can be used in case of a terroristic attack with nuclear and or radiological instruments. So we identified at first 34 radionuclides. These radionuclides that can be potentially used during a nuclear radiological event attack are classified not according to the harmful effect as it's done by the United States. The radionuclides are characterized based on the dose of the conversion coefficient. So based on the potential harmful effect that they are capable to provide in case of attack. No, we didn't do this kind of distinction. We distinguished the radionuclides according to the most likely source of supply. So we try to put ourselves in the clothes of a terrorist that is planning to do an attack, that is planning to produce harmful effects for the health of the public in a certain region. And obviously, we have to consider the possibility to have the radioactive agents that we want to use. And instead of the idea that we can have, obviously, the final design of an attack has to consider the actual availability of the agents that we want to use. And we have to know how this radioactive can be provided, how this radioactive can be assembled together, can be grouped together in the proper amount before attack. And this likelihood of supply was related by considering two variables: the availability and the ease of prevention. Obviously, in the national deposits of radioactive materials, we have a lot of transferring chemicals. In Italy, not so much, but you can say that we have a lot of transferring chemicals. But, of course, entering the site like a project is not visible. So a lot of material, we have a sort of greater availability, a greater variability, but the diversion is not visible. Otherwise, for example, we have the opposite example represented by the radionuclides used in nuclear medicine. We have probably much lesser amount that's stored in the hospital, so much less amount, but much higher probability of entering the hospital without being arrested, without being stopped. So probably it's much worse an attack designed with that kind of agents instead of the classical one that we see. So this is the result. I don't know if the dimension of the slide allows you to read what's written inside, but you only have to know that in green you have 6 radionuclides that can be provided by finding inside the so-called RIA laboratories, the so-called radioimmunological assay laboratories, which are performed biological assays by using radioactive. And for example, I don't know if someone of you is experiencing this theory, but commonly carbon 14, lead 55, nickel 63 are normally used inside the process. It's crazy. You can answer me that it's not easy to design an attack with the carbon 14 because it's a better pure emitter, but maybe something can be done. In part, we have the nuclear medicine. Well, because as you know, the nuclear medicine industry is growing in the last years and in the present, so we have a lot of also very dangerous radionuclides, gamma emitter radionuclides, alpha emitter radionuclides that are used in the nuclear medicine. And we have, for example, the fluorine 18, the molybdenum 99, the magnesium 99, and use for sure. In the blue, we have the industrial application, 635, and in yellow, all the others. All the others that are using different scenarios so can be classified into the categorization 8. So let's see an example of this sheet. They are very long, at least 3 pages for each radionuclides. I had to arrange an example of this sheet inside the slide, so I can use, I don't remember, maybe 5 slides. So you have to think about the fact that all that you are going to see is arranged in a single sheet on the plate. Let's consider, for example, cobalt. On the right side of the slide, you have the light, the physical light in days. You have the biological time. You can put the remark, and we will go a little bit more in detail in a few seconds. And the specific activity, I don't know which are the knowledge of you pertaining to the nuclear things. So I don't know if you understand which are these parameters, but in case please ask me during the talk. Then we have the typology of the game, and we have the main conditions. In case of copper, if someone of you is already experienced in radiation, will understand without any problems the two peaks, gamma peaks emitted by the global system. The nuclear data are extracted from a national database, which is the national database developed by the Erwin Becquerel laboratory in France. This database was chosen because it is continuously updated, and it collects information, the most recent information about the half-life, the specific activity, the emissions, and the respective probabilities. So the reason why we chose this database is only the fact that the database is the only one that is continuously updated. Yes, but as you know, as someone of you may know, the biological half-life, so let me say in very large words, the easiness of the radioactive elements to be retained inside the body after an intake, after an incorporation. This biological half-life is not contained in the national database because it does not depend only on the radioactive element, but it depends mainly on the chemical form of the radioactive elements. So on the compounds of the radioactive in which the radioactive elements is binded. So to fill the field of the biological half-life, we have to consider specific literature. So we have to make specific literature review for each of the 34 radionuclides considered. So let's imagine to scroll the sheet. We have a section, a subsection dedicated to the internal, the external. In this section, we have for the specific element of 16 three dose conversion factors. The first for the equivalent dose to the skin, the second for the equivalent dose to the lens of the eye, and the third for the effective dose. I think that you know the meaning of this quantity, or you have heard during the morning of this book. And you have 4 different scenarios in which these dose coefficients are provided. And all these scenarios have been originally studied and developed by the working group inside the paper. So it's a very important output of the working group for the health sector, because these sheets are usable in principle for many other different purposes. We considered 3 scenarios specific and related to the exposure of the first responders. So the people that are responding on the side, directly on the side of the event, without any information, specific information about the fact that about the event already happened, just happened. And we have one scenario related to the exposure of the healthcare professionals, the healthcare workers. The scenario related to first responders is reported in purple. The last one is reported in green. For the first responders, we considered, and so we made simulations, 3 different scenarios. The contaminated ground, so you have to imagine simply first responder that is followed on the side where a nuclear radiological attack has just happened. So you have to imagine that all the radioactive elements are spread over the surface of the soil. And obviously the first responders will walk on the ground without knowing that the ground is superficially contaminated. So the first scenario is the contaminated ground. The second scenario is the plume submersion, which means that an external exposure may also occur due to the fact that the radioactive elements are also contained in the air that is inhaled by the first person. So, radioactive agents are probably spread all over the soil, but are also spread in the air that we are inhaling, in the air that we are living in. The last is the contaminated object. So we imagine a piece of something made of lead that was spread out by the event, and we mention also that that object is contaminated. It's superficially contaminated. So it's a piece of something, metallic piece of something, that displays simply on the ground due to an explosion occurred on the site of the emergency. And obviously, the first responders need to work, trying to avoid, to maximize the distance from the piece, but in some circumstances, let's imagine if we have a victim right close to this piece, the first responder is exposed to mainly gamma radiation emitted by the lights responsible for the contamination of this piece. For the healthcare professional, we consider the scenario of a patient that is placed on the healthcare bed and is assisted and is treated by the healthcare professional. And we have imagined that this patient, this victim that is being treated, is superficially contaminated. So the decontamination was not feasible due to different causes. So the healthcare professionals needed to work on the patient, try to save his or her life without previously decontaminating the patient. So they are very useful, they are very specific for the scenarios that we are going to encounter in this kind of things. Then we have a specific section for the internal exposure. In this section, you have the dose conversion coefficient. So the coefficient will be used to evaluate the dose in case of the two main internal exposure pathways. So inhalation and injection. The sheets are recorded in Italian, due to the fact that I try to maintain the exact form of the radioactive specific sheets. Here you have the inhalation, and here you have the injection. Obviously, both inhalation and ingestion depends on the chemical form. They do not depend only on the radioactive agents. So we made some assumption. We had two main possibilities. The first one was to consider all the possible chemical forms and to avoid a very long list of those conclusions. The second possibility is to make assumption, to consider the chemical form that the International Commission on Radiological Protection recommends to consider when you don't have information about the chemical form of the agent. And this is affected, maybe from a practical point of view, it's not so interesting to understand why we decided to insert only two dose conversion coefficients, one for inhalation, one for ingestion. It's much more philosophical than practical. You have to imagine a crisis situation. Maybe the authorities responsible for the response management to read very fastly and to go through all the documents that they have, and they have to provide a very quick answer, a very quick quantification of the danger, quantification of the health risk. So, in our opinion, it was best to insert only one coefficient, easy to be found. So once you have identified the radioactive agents, you have immediately an identification of the chemical form. This is the chemical form. It's called titanium. This is the glass of absorption. Some very technical things. You can handle it. So it's better from our point of view. It's better from a crisis, for a crisis management situation. It's much worse in case you have to evaluate scientifically the doses received by the certain person. For example, in a medical department, in a hospital, and so on. If you have something related to the screening, oh yes, we have something related to the screening. We consider two times, 1 hour and 6 hours. So 1 hour after the accident and 6 hours after the accident. And we put here by making some literature review, very wide literature review, we inserted in the table the tissue or the organ that is mostly retaining, that is retaining the larger part of the radioactive agents incorporated after 1 hour and after 6 hours. In case of cobalt 16, the situation is not so good because we have the elementary reactor both 1 hour after the event and 6 hours after the event. And you have also elementary reactor regardless the fact that you constrain radiation. So the majority of cobalt 16, regardless the way of intake, after 1 hour and after 6 hours, is completed in our alimentary tract. This information is useful for 3 purposes. I don't know if you are already seen something like this, but you have specific measuring methods applied to certain portion of the human body. So it's very useful to understand which is the part of the body in which we can expect larger amounts of radioactive agents, because they fix the performance of the method, you can shorten the length of the measurement, or fix the length of the measurement, you can increase the performance of the method. You can look to something much bigger, much more. The last subsection is dedicated to the methods to be used to verify the internal contamination. I don't know if you are able to read something, but it's not meaningful. You can neglect if you cannot read it. It's not a problem at all. All the things that you need to know are explained in the bottom part of the slide. So you have 2 subsections. The first one is dedicated to the measurement methods that can be used to detect internal contamination in standard situation, both in vivo way and in vitro in reality. But you have also the measurement methods to be considered in emergency situation, because an emergency is characterized by probably a much higher availability of detection instrument, but a much lesser availability of time. So you tend to have the need to analyze much more people than in standard condition. So you have to reduce the time of your measurement. Maybe you have to reduce also the amount of your samples. Let's imagine a typical in vitro measurement, the one performed on urine. In normal condition, the professional of the nuclear industry are required to collect urine all over 1 day the overall amount of more than 1 liter. Not in emergency situation, you don't need to ask someone to wait 1 day to collect all the urine. So, consider, for example, I don't know, for urine is considered a sample ranging from 50 to 200 milliliters. So much lesser amount of urine. So let's talk the preventive measures that are recommended to be implemented by the civil defense plan applied to the health sector. We have 3 kinds of prevention. The first one is represented by all the interventions that can be considered, that can be applied to avoid or reduce the occurrence of adverse events. So we can consider the primary prevention as the prevention that we mean in our daily life, everyday life. So prevention means reducing or avoiding, hopefully, the occurrence of adverse events. The secondary prevention is determined by all those interventions that can allow to easily and fastly identify the risk and dangers of a certain element to contain the effect. The tertiary prevention is, on the other hand, aimed to manage the consequences, to avoid the crisis. So we can say that the primary prevention means preventing an emergency. The secondary prevention means containing the result of an emergency. The tertiary prevention means increasing the threshold above which the emergency becomes crisis. So primary and secondary means preventing an emergency. Tertiary means preventing the crisis. And tertiary prevention provisions can be diplomatic, internal security, economic cluster, military, and some general ones. I don't want to go into details. I prefer to give a look to other things. The first one is dedicated to prevention, indicating of an emergency, and the tertiary is dedicated to the prevention of a crisis. Let's go on. If we speak specifically of the health sector, we can better describe the intervention that can be considered also the third type, so enhance the threshold of crisis. Looking at the health sector, we have obviously, first of all, and this point is probably, let me say, the most difficult to be accomplished, the most difficult to be achieved. Identification and location of healthcare facility suitable for treatment activities. We have to understand on the national territories which are the facilities capable of doing what and capable of doing what on which amount of people. Obviously, we have the promotion of research and technological development, and this National Defense Plan was was a very good example of this, because in the framework of the development of an institutional document, we made some research, and we also published the specific risk sheet that you have seen before. Obviously, the creation of individual environmental epidemiological control networks, the preparation, enhancement, and maintenance of a national response capacities, including specific protocols. And then we have the prophylaxis. Prophylaxis for not for the public, prophylaxis for all the representatives, all the professionals working in the constitutional body, because in an emergency we are in the field of trying to protect the public. In crisis, firstly, we have to protect people that are in charge of making decisions, that are in charge of choosing, that are in charge of organizing the response. So, first of all, we have to dedicate a specific prophylaxis to the people that are responsible for the functioning of the state. Civil defense means exactly this, means assuring the functioning of the state. Also, in case of an emergency can compromise the health of the public, can compromise the health of the environment, but cannot compromise the functioning of the state. Because if the state doesn't work, the response is completely irrelevant. I'm not talking from a response point of view. You have to think about all the things that are done by the states in our condition that can be destroyed during a crisis. Then we have the safe storage of essential tools. So we have to organize this place of the territory in which we can store drugs and tools, drugs and equipment. And another important thing is the development of hospital to try specific hospital in order to enhance the possibility of an hospital to face a single emergency. Let's have a look at the last sentence that I put on the slide. Interventions that do not prevent emergencies, but they rise the crisis threshold. Okay. Mi ricordo che c'è. No, okay, so it's better to have the short break right now. So 5 minutes.
No, per capire in pratica in questo momento ogni diciamo, nucleo radioattivo è caratterizzato da queste tabelle in maniera diciamo sistematica ma diciamo speditiva per l'uso
Esattamente.
nel complesso.
Sono proprio specifiche per l'uso. Però chiaramente poi i coefficienti forniti sono utili per tante circostanze, però sono specifici per questi scenari qui. Qui non troverai, ad esempio, scenari tipici del settore nucleare che possono essere la contaminazione di cibo. Perché non è di interesse di un gestore di cibo,
Che ne so, per esempio, faccio un esempio così. Se c'è tipo, che ne so, una perdita di una scoria radioattiva e dentro cioè noi magari sappiamo che in quel bidone c'è, che ne so, cesio.
Esatto.
Quindi noi, per esempio, per approcciarci a un intervento pratico usiamo la scheda del cesio.
Esattamente. Senza cercare documenti in giro.
Certo. Grazie.
Ci stiamo ancora.
No, grazie.
Allora poi ci vediamo e faccio usare Yes.
So I think that we can slowly resume that we try to arrive at the end of the presentation. If you all the information that I want to give to you. So we have finished our first part of the lesson, and let's with the need of developing specific hospital protocols. So this is not the only thing that is done by the study, but this study also consider the different elements that need to be taken into account when developing these hospital protocols. These elements we consider within the protocols to be drafted have been divided in different categories. The first one is the management measure that need to be considered. They comprehend the identification and drafting of standard operating procedures. So the protocols of a certain hospital needs to include the need of identify and draft standard operating procedure. Then we have, of course, the formation of a radiological emergency management team. in which the different roles need to be clearly identified. Then we have the establishment of an operation center, so a room, a certain place inside the facility, in which the communication with outside and inside needs to be assured in every situation. Then we have the identification of the contact points. The contact points for the hospital need to be clearly identified. And the contact points need to be both with the competent local authorities and with the competent national authorities. But we have also to have in the protocols clearly identified the hospital professionals which have some knowledges in the field of radiation protection. For example, the medical physicist, the oncologist, the radiologist, the radiology technician, and radiation protection experts. Because inside the team that is required to face an emergency, we have to have people that know something about radiation protection. We cannot train specifically people that do not know at all nothing about radiation. Identification of relevant hospital groups and the relevant hospital groups that can serve as a support in case of emergency are the emergency medicine, the internal medicine, the surgery, laboratories, hospital pharmacy, and immunology for sure. And obviously we have to train the staff that belongs to the radiation emergency management team. Let's go to the technical measures. We specifically drafted the technical measure that need to be considered in the protocols of the hospitals. The hospital needs to make an inventory and, if possible, to ensure the availability of all the following equipments. Personal protective equipments, and in the annex of the plan we have also the list of all the different personal protective equipment to be considered, divided by priority. Electronic personal dosimeters, surface contamination detectors, screening portals, spectrometric detectors, shielded containers to contain non-radioactive stuff or contaminated stuff used inside the hospital for the treatment of patients, and surface storing materials used to protect and to prevent the contamination of superficial objects, superficial surfaces of objects. So the first two belong to the category of personal protection, the other three to the category of monitoring, and the last one to the environmental protection category. I have to clearly state that an hospital that is in charge of responding to a nuclear radiological emergency is not required to have all these things. The things that you have depend on the things that you are prepared to face. And obviously, if you have no screening portal, for example, at the entry of patients, you can still be adequate for responding in case of a nuclear radiological event. So you have to define a priority into chasing different objects and different equipment. And the priority is clearly given in the annex. In the annex, you have the instrument that you have for sure to have sort of priority 0. It's a kind of minimal location, minimal equipment. Then you have priority 1, strongly willing to be purchased. Then priority 2, priority 3, and priority 4. To go to the next priority level, you have to be completed to have completed the priority level before. So only once you have all the equipments at level 0, you can pass to level 1. To have equipments, you have to specify technical specifics, the availability, if the specific equipment is available or not, the numerosity, how many of them objects do you have in your hospital, and the location where they are. Let's go to the contamination. A very interesting matter. I don't know why, but contamination is always a very interesting matter. So generally, a lot of people is interested in this aspect. That, let me say, is very, very small. let's try to understand why the contamination is not so important as we know. Having as we see maybe. Contamination may be carried out on site. Obviously, in the previous plan, the decontamination needs to be performed on site by the check-in-shop. I don't know if translate in English, the medical support team, the medical first responders on site. Now we don't have this kind of requirement. But of course, the hospital need to be capable of verifying contamination to the contaminated as well. Why? Because the contamination occurred on site may be not complete, the decontamination occurred on site may be stopped due to some problems occurring in the patient during the decontamination, but also because many patients may arrive at the hospital independently, so without being treated locally. So we have to consider this possibility. Patients can be arrived and we can reach the hospital without being included in the events on site. We have to expect a large number of people reaching the hospital site without having been considered by the responsible site. But depending on the number of patients, we have to consider the first one. If we have a pretty low number of people reaching the hospital, the first possibility is to decontaminate the external surfaces of all the patients. So at the end, the contamination possibility to decontaminate all the patients. But it's much more likely to have the second scenario. So we have to have the possibility to firstly screen the patients and decontaminate only those that result to be contaminated. In general, we have to inventory and ensure the availability of a decontamination facility that is composed by at least 3 lines, one for men, one for women, and one for patients with specific need. The flow needs to be unidirectional. The facility should be equipped with decontamination showers, and the decontamination should be equipped with wastewater management system. But we have also to consider the fact that the contamination facility needs to be protected from secondary attack. One of the, obviously, is a crime. It's a crime against humanity. It's stated by the United Nations organization, but it's very common in military context to have attack, the so-called secondary attack, to the facility in which the state is taking care, is assisting, is treating medically the victims of the first deaths. So we have to protect the contamination site because it's a sensible site. And obviously we have to train the contamination that needs to be available 24 hours a day and 7 days per week. And the procedures to be used for the decontamination has to be written. So let's go on. This slide needs to be clearly understood. Maybe it's the most important slide I wrote of all the presentation. I think that this part, the first part of this slide, is not known at all by the population. I think that this should be the first thing to communicate to the population to guarantee a first level of awareness that we see. Most of the external contamination can be effectively and independently removed by the public itself, primarily through undressing and washing with regular soaps, with normal products used for the cosmetic habits, the normal cosmetic habits. But we have to say another very important thing. The magnitude of the dose resulting from a superficial contamination of clothes and skin is generally very low due to the ease and the effectiveness of the decontamination proceedings. Due to the fact that the contamination is very easy and can be easily achieved by everyone in the room without any assistance, generally the incidents and the accidents that occur all over the world have teached us that the dose received due to external contamination is very low. So, which are the consequences? The need for medical treatments for individual externally contaminated is generally a very rare circumstances. So, generally, the people that receive doses due to external contamination are not in the strong need of being medically treated. So, which is the major concern in case of radiological and nuclear events. The internal contamination. Obviously, other than the effect, the direct effect of the attack at the site of it. So, we have to say that the extensive individual, for this reason, for the same reason, there is no need of monitoring the superficial contamination of people. I don't know why, maybe due to the films, due to some movies, we are in the way of thinking that in case of nuclear or radiological attack, you have to make very large facilities which you go to scan the contamination and then you have, I mean, a superficial contamination. But there is no need at all to do this. You can remove mostly of your contamination by very easy procedures. Much easier than the rest that should have been improved, that we have to do in place in case of managing a lot of people. So, extensive individual monitoring is not functional for estimating the individual risk, but it's not functional also for identifying individuals that need appropriate action to be carried out to guarantee his health. And this is due to the fact that the external contamination procedure can be carried out quickly and independently by the population. Due to this fact, there is no need from a practical point of view to scan the population for external contamination. This statement should be clearly for all of you. So why we are planning to perform a large scanning of superficial contamination if there is no need of doing it? Because there is not only a matter of practice. We are also to consider that implementing extensive external contamination monitoring has some good effect on limiting or controlling the psychological impact of the event, because the population understands from the existence of this extensive monitoring the fact that the state is controlling the situation. And it's something linked to the psychological aspect of the human behavior. The other thing, if you want to find an advantage of this approach, is that we can assess the actual spread of radioactive materials at a distance from the location event. Let me say it's a kind of scientific process, just to reconstruct the dynamics involved in the event, not for any purposes. For example, this is a big push in which a large, extensive monitoring has been done, completely useless from the end point of view. There have been a lot of products into the overestimation of the metabolic cancer, but I don't want to go into detail with these kind of things. So, just to conclude this slide, external contamination monitoring must take place where at the hospital, absolutely not, because the risk is saturating the response of an hospital that is heavily induced by the response to a nuclear radiological event. So, we are conscious that we are doing something related to psychological aspect. So we have to face psychological aspect not in front of the hospital because they are doing serious things. So we have to do not serious things, so we need the psychological aspect far from the hospital, just to ensure the hospital to be effective. So the external contamination modeling must take place in large reception areas organized outside the affected area in buildings with very large indoor or outdoor spaces such as schools, gyms, unused warehouse, sport halls, stadiums, and particles. Some further advices for decontamination. This is the decontamination approach that we proposed inside the document. Step of prescreening and one step of screening. In this slide, I'm presenting only the first step of prescreening because the second one is much easier to be explained than showed on a slide. So, first of all, the problem is that we have to screen for the external contamination a lot of people. The first possibility, if you ask to someone who is not expert of the sector, you will have a response that the best solution are the products, the modern products. They are equipped with scintillation detectors, plastic scintillation detector, are extremely sensible, but have some problems. On the right side, you have, let's imagine, a gym. A gym used for decontamination, for mass decontamination of the pollution. In red, you have the products. And you can organize rows of people, queues of people testing with all the products. But you have to assure a minimum distance between the products in order to avoid multi-acts. In order to avoid that the contaminated person passing through the portal number 2 determines also a positive alarm at the portal 1, at the portal 3, and the portal 4. So it's not so easy to have a device that is very sensible because you have the notification by simply passing inside the portal. So 2-3 seconds of passing the portals, but the device should not be sensible to all the other things. So the solution is the state is increasing the distance between the portals. So to do a screening with the portals, you need a very large device. So this cannot be the first approach in case you have a very high number of people. You have to do a screening much easier, much cheaper. The solution that we recommended is to organize an S walking pathway with people distanced by 3 meters, and the people, due to this S pathway, are forced to pass in front of a professional, simply wearing a personal receiver with real-time monitoring. By this kind of pattern, you are sure that every person shows the front of his body and then the back of his body to the personal receiver with real-time monitoring. This system can reach up to 1,200 people per hour. It's very easy because it only needs something to signal the path to be followed by walking, and you only need a personal receiver that can assume that every professional involved in the response is at least taking with a personal receiver with a real-time. The second step is to have not contaminated people on the side and to be further investigated people on the other side. The people are further investigated by using a much more professional monitor with spectrometric capabilities to measure the radiation emitted from inside the body or the radiation emitted by the radioactive contamination from the surface of the body. Only after the second step. So, first step with personal electronic receiver. The second step with professional monitor. The third step with portals. Preferably to be implemented after a second step of screening. Another very important aspect of the infrastructure to be organized during the emergency response is the triage. We have a triage of the triage performed at your site and a triage performed at the hospital. The purpose of the field triage is to determine the initial management of the patient. And when you define how to manage a patient directly at the site of an event, you have to strongly define that this patient probably should be transported to an hospital. On the other hand, the hospital triage is aimed to define the hospital-based management. The hospital triage is composed of two subsequent steps. The first one is the trauma triage. As a result of the trauma triage, we have the patient classified among those in life-threatening condition requiring immediate medical treatment, patient with serious conditions requiring not immediate medical treatment, and patient that can be treated. After the trauma triage, the people need to be analyzed from a radiological point of view. We have to understand which people have exceeded the levels of the acute radiation syndrome. The patient that we don't know exactly if they are above, right above or right below the level, and the patient that for sure are not at risk of experiencing an acute radiation syndrome. In general, pertaining to the triage, we have to inventory and ensure the availability of at least 2 trained triage teams. We have to organize, we have to purchase a management system for the patient registration. We have to provide specific personal protective equipment. We have to provide electronic personal procedures to the staff of the triage. We have to provide contamination detectors, screening portals, spectrometric detectors, shipping containers, and surface modeling materials. You have for sure recognized that all the last items are already included in the general checklist. So for the triage, we have some further specific provisions, which are the first 2 months. So another very important thing that I want to say in the remaining minutes is that, as we have seen, relative to the tertiary healthcare prevention, this is the same like we have seen before, but previously I decided to highlight the development of hospital protocols, and we have seen a little bit more in details the content of these hospital protocols. Now I have highlighted these 2 items: the prophylaxis and the safe storage of assets. How it is done? In 2003, receiving the first edition of the civil defense plan, have established the creation and the management of the so-called SNA, which in Italian stands for Scorta Nazionale Antidoti, and in English we can translate it Strategic Reserve of Pharmaceutical Supplies. This supplies at first was administered by the Civil Protection Department, then the responsibility passed to the Ministry of Health, and now the responsibility is still in the hands of the Ministry of Health. In 2020, the SNA was converted to SNAF, where the F stands for Farmaci in Italian, that means drugs. So in this strategic reserve, we have antidotes, but also drugs. The reserve is articulated in 13 national level deposits, at least 1 regional deposit for each region, excluding Friuli, Venezia Giulia, and Sardinia, and some other regional minimum deposits that are specifically conceived to store, to assure the availability of the potassium iodide used as a reference prophylaxis against against iodine, radioactive iodine incorporation after a nuclear radiological accident. These are the entrants that are contained inside the reserve. We have the DFCA, the MMPS, the TPA, and the Russian blue. I don't know if someone of you is a doctor, I don't know if someone of you is a medical professional. I just want to give my excuse to the medical professionals, but they work in pretty the same way, most of about the same way, roughly the same way. They are used for the internal contamination after the internal contamination or the incorporation of polonium, in case of PSA, polonium and cobalt in case of DMFPS. In case of transuranic elements, here we use the DTPA and we use the Prussian blue in case of incorporation of C2, mainly C2. And the mechanism of action is the creation of stable hydrosoluble complex with heavy metals. Some differences in the function principle in the Prussian blue exist. Then we have the prophylaxis, and here we have the potassium iodide. It is used for the internal contamination of iodine. It needs to be used right before, at maximum 48 hours before the incorporation of iodine, and up to some hours after the incorporation. Then the effectiveness obviously decreases. For each drug, in addition to the mechanism of action, in the documents stored and managed by the SNAF, we have the timing, the route of intake, the method of administration, the contraindication and the main side effects, and the storage instruction to be followed during the storage. So let's go rapidly to the end of the presentation. You have a lot of other information. You can consider this presentation as a kind of collection of the main elements of the plan. Here you have a diagram that we included inside the guidelines to help organizing the response at pre-hospital level. We have a medical response in Seattle. The person who, upon a notification, triggers the intervention chain, starts the intervention chain. This figure is responsible for collecting the basic information and for assuring the appropriate management of the patient at the very early phase of the emergency. Then we have the so-called first responders, who simply is the person that firstly arrives on site. He's responsible for handling the initial aspect of the on-site emergency, and only if qualified, he is authorized to do the first medical treatment of the patient. Then we have the contamination team that we have seen. And here I just want to give you some further details very shortly about the contamination. If a mobile field decontamination unit is available, so if the decontamination can be performed also on site, only individuals requiring transport to a medical facility should undergo decontamination. Only those that we are planning to transfer to an hospital. Furthermore, the field contamination should be prioritized over first aid only for individuals that are not in immediate danger of life. So to do the contamination site, we need two conditions. First of all, we have identified that the patient needs to be transported to the hospital. Secondly, the patient is not in immediate risk of life, so he can be treated decontaminated. For those in critical conditions, obviously the immediate first aid must take precedence. So you have to perform firstly the first aid, and also only after this first aid, when the patient has been stabilized, you can perform the decontamination. If you have not a field contamination unit, if it's possible, if the patient is not in immediate risk of life, it's still recommended to remove at least the outer layer of the goods and to wash, if possible, the exposed surfaces of the skin. So we have the medical team responsible for the transport, and then you have the same, conceptually, the same scheme to try to have the organization of the hospital, of the response, the medical response at the hospital.
The previous scheme was concerned with the pre-hospital organization. Then we have another scheme with the hospital organization. We have a triage team. It's in the second level of triage in case of people being treated also on site, but this is the first level of triage in case of people arriving directly and independently to the hospital. We have the medical personnel with radiological expertise that is involved in the radiological response, specialists in medical physics, and professionals from nuclear medicine and veterinary departments. We have the hospital emergency response team. And last but not least, we have a schematic representation including the guidelines of how to organize the different spaces, the different environments inside an hospital. This stands for triage. The red lines are contaminated patients. The green line stands for the non-contaminated one. The triage can be, it's preferable to do the triage outside of the structure, but it's still allowed to triage inside. As you can see, you have to know that also contaminated patients need. I don't know why, maybe another time they goes maybe movies. We are used to think that contaminated people need to be first decontaminated to be after medically treated. This is not true. In case of people that are in urgent risk of life, we have prioritized the medical treatment relative to the decontamination. So you have the red line for the contaminated patients, the green line for the not contaminated one. We have a reception area in which the patients are examined and wait for the medical treatment on the hot line and on the cold line. You have a medical treatment for the contaminated patients. You have a medical treatment for the not contaminated patients. But you have also the possibility, in case you evaluate that the patient is not in an urgent waiting of medical treatment, to decontaminate the patient before medical treatment. In this case, the medical treatment can occur together with the non-contaminated ones. And then at the end of the facility, we have the factor. So, this is the end of the presentation. I just want to thank you for the organization. And these are all my efforts for voluntary lectures.
Thank you, Gonzalo.